Good day, ladies, and welcome to the Corporate Responsibility Due Diligence, a Governance Perspective conference call. My name is Crystal, and I will be the operator for today. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. If at any time you require operator assistance, please press star followed by 0, and we will be happy to assist you. I would like to turn the conference over to Ms. Michelle Cooper, Senior VP and Corporate Responsibility Officer for CHI. Please proceed.
Thanks. Welcome, everybody. We're happy to be able to present our 5th educational webcast for compliance oversight members as well as any board members interested in learning more about fiduciary responsibility associated with overseeing the compliance function. Today, I've got Susan Shiflett and Joyce Graham going to talk with you about some processes and procedures that we have in place to help you understand our compliance due diligence process. So to turn it over to Susan, she's going to offer a reflection, and she is our Vice President of Corporate Responsibility at the national level and is eminently involved in much of the due diligence effort from a compliance standpoint. So Susan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, everybody. The reflection that I have today that I want to share comes from CHI's charism book. If you recall, a charism in the context of this book is defined as a gift, a talent, or potential that's to an individual from the Spirit for the good of the church. An excerpt that I want to read, it was penned in 1998 by Sister Esther Anderson, who was a former CHI board chair, and she's speaking about the charism of CHI. The founding of the tapestry of Catholic health initiatives were aware of the risk involved in being pioneer weavers, but they knew the risk is consistent with being fully faith people. They recognized a defining moment in history to shape the direction of the healing ministry of the future, and they acted courageously. We're blessed with the advantage of a rich history, vast experience, and a compelling mission. They have their own unique patterns in their times, demonstrated a spirit of innovation which was built on the tradition of caring exercised by those who founded and built healthcare ministry in the United States. I'm familiar with the history of Catholic healthcare ministry, saw the consistent with what religious communities have done throughout their more than 200 years of sponsoring health care in this vast country. Into the future, if Catholic Health Initiatives is to institutionalize the charism of risk-taking given to its founding members, it will continue the process of weaving and reweaving, bringing things in the organization in alignment with the vision, mission, and core values. This will require the people involved to be people of prayer with listening hearts in order to have a transforming response to the signs of the times. It will necessitate people who are willing to continue to reappropriate the founding charism. Most of all, it will require people who put their trust in the Spirit, who has been present to us as we seek to share the healing ministry of Jesus in each age. And with that, I just want to offer a short prayer. Dear Father, just be with us this morning as we talk about the growth opportunities that CHI has and how we as compliance professionals and board respond to decisions as we go forward. The processes that we have put in place, that those who are involved in this due diligence process and the expansion of CHI have been wise decisions. Amen. So with that, we'll go on to session objectives. And most of you know Pat Cahill, who was the first CEO of CHI. She, in one of the CHI videos, she's very candid when she said there had not been much due diligence done when the founding congregations came together. CHI. She states that it had been a huge leap of faith, like a wing and a prayer. a result of that leap of faith is one of the nation's largest healthcare systems in the United States. However, as CHI continues to grow and expand, CHI leaders recognized there needed to be more of a formal process in place. Prayer obviously is a great part of that, how we go forward. But we also knew that there needed to be a more formal process to assess the viability of potential growth opportunities going forward. Today we're going to talk, Joyce and I are going to provide an overview of CHI's transactional due diligence process and the role that corporate responsibility plays in that process. Talk about the types of reviews that we do to assess potential risk. Also, what you need to be aware of from a fiduciary perspective with respect to due diligence efforts and the decisions that need to be made as a result of those efforts. So I'm going to provide more of an overview of the due diligence process, and then Joyce will focus on the compliance piece of it. Also, we'll have time for questions and answers after our presentation. So this education topic, well, as I mentioned, CHI continues to grow and expand in new markets, new business lines. Along with those new ventures come complex regulations and laws, government scrutiny, and also potential government investigations. And the more we know about these prospective ventures, the better we will be prepared to go forward. As a board member, you should be informed of any potentially significant matters that might be identified that be related to growth strategies in your market. Such compliance issues could have negative financial and or reputational impact to organizations if they're not identified in a proactive manner and addressed. So the goal of the due diligence process is really to find out as much as you can about the other organization or entity, assess and determine if the transaction is a viable option. Is it financially sound? Does it make sense from a strategic perspective? Does the entity organization have the same values? Obviously, from a compliance perspective, we want to know if there are significant risks that might negatively impact the organization. Analysis of information also helps the due diligence team when they're structuring and negotiating the transaction. For example, there may be aspects of the transaction that are not known prior to the due diligence process that may change how the transaction will look going forward. And it's just critical that we understand the aspects of the other party's business before consummating the final deal. This process helps to limit the liability exposure by discovering potential problems or risks. And some of those, as identified during the due diligence process, they can actually be addressed to the transaction ever closes. Not identified, though, until after close, then CHI or the CHI market would most likely be liable for any negative impact. High-risk areas that we focus on during the due diligence process includes coding and billing, always a high-risk area, clinical appropriateness or medical necessity of care that's provided, if it's provided in the right care setting, physician contracting, again, always a high-risk area. And all these, if there are issues identified with them, have a high liability for exposure to the organization. That due diligence helps with, assists with operational planning and integration, and to help facilitate a very smooth day one transition. So we go from the close to day one where CHI or the CHI entity takes over. All of that, the more information that we were able to across during the due diligence process just helps leaders from both sides understand the priorities for a successful integration. For example, issues identified related to physician contracting, we know that implementing CHI's physician contracting process was a high priority task during integration. So CHI formed a transaction team to lead all due diligence activities throughout CHI. And the transaction team is led by Tim Gorman. And from that transaction team, the due diligence team was formed. And that team is represented by individuals from varying functional areas, such as corporate responsibility, legal, finance, risk insurance, human resources, mission, outside counsel, clinical, others, depending on the nature of the transaction. And in addition, CRP, we also utilize the services of independent auditors to help with, to review specialized areas such as coding and billing, clinical appropriateness where some clinical expertise is needed, and then also physician payments and physician contracts. So this process requires a lot of coordination. It requires a lot of collaboration with many individuals to ensure that we meet timely and reports, and that we have comprehensive analysis of the transaction, ultimately to ensure the best interests of CHI and its entities are served. Whenever we have a due diligence going on, we routinely meet conference calls on a weekly basis when varying functional areas are represented, and you share some things that you've identified, especially if there are any risk areas, and it really helps that we all hear that information at the same time, or where you are, and we're all very connected. So it really helps to solidify our more global of the entity. Many of the due diligence efforts that local markets are involved in are related to acquiring or partnering with physician practices. And to assist with the compliance assessment of these transactions, CRP has developed client tools, resources, education to facilitate a standard and comprehensive process. Tools are also available for assessing specialty areas such as research, laboratory, IT security and privacy, long-term care, and others, again, depending on what the transaction is. So if your local markets are embarking on growth strategies, it's really important that CRP staff are made aware of these efforts, and so that they can be engaged to conduct the compliance work to identify potential risk areas and assess the overall compliance environment. I'm going to turn it over to Joyce Graham, who is the Director of CRP Transactions, and she's also the Corporate Responsibility Officer for St. Joe's in Reading, Pennsylvania. And Joyce has been very actively involved in many of the due diligence efforts at CHI over the last couple of years, and now most recently she's involved with the Hershey and St. Joe's Reading due diligence effort. So I'm going to turn it over to Joyce.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everybody. So the purpose of our due diligence is to really get a clear and accurate description of the organization's compliance program effectiveness. The AG has federal sentencing guidelines. In that document, it outlines all elements of an effective compliance program. and it's based upon that guidance that we're looking. We have developed a tool, a master list of questions, and we're using those questions to see how well aligned the facility organization, the physician's practice, whatever it is, how aligned is their compliance program with the government's compliance program. We know for sure that people make mistakes, and as long as we have people operating in hospitals, there's going to be mistakes that happen. You're going to have a facility where everything happens perfectly, but we do want to attain a reputation as being highly reliable, and highly reliable organizations have different controls in place so that it can be effective. So we make sure that we are meeting the essential elements, that this new opportunity is also meeting those essential elements, and if not, what steps can be taken to mitigate. In the end that you have a situation where you have to approach the government to disclose, we want it to be that we can avoid having any kind of a penalty, avoid having a written integrity agreement, and to do that, want to be able to say, see, we have this record of being effective in the past. Dear government man with the badge, we do monitoring. We are trying to be effective. This was just a mistake. This wasn't fraud and abuse. This wasn't intentional neglect. We have we have all of our ducks in a row, and this was just a human error. So that's what our overall goal is, to get a good sense of AR so that we can mitigate, so that moving forward, if there is any dilemmas, we'll be viewed as good corporate citizens and just regular guys trying to do a good job who made an innocent mistake. When we have that accurate description, we're providing that information then to the business leaders for making decisions. Then options, we're doing our due diligence, and we've identified some best practices. So when we come upon those, that's terrific, and we want to take those learnings and see how we then can use them for CHI overall to help everybody. So looking for potential vulnerabilities and their best practices. Based on what we see, we flag those items for the decision makers, and we recommend mitigation strategies in the event that the organization decides it wants to move forward. One is from this past experience that when you participate in one due diligence, you've participated in one due diligence. They're all very different. They all identify different kinds of situations. It's one of the reasons, though, I think that the due diligence process is adding value to the organization, because in each of the exercises that we've done, we have found individualized issues, and we're able to take mitigating steps in order to spare HI from high penalties or other issues as we move forward. So I'll just give you a couple examples of that. In one of our markets, there was a group that wanted to take on a big cardiology practice, big multi-specialty group of patients. By taking the time to do this due diligence review, we learned what things the doctors are doing well as far as the documentation goes, and areas where they were weak. We did have to spend a lot of time or a lot of money in identifying that. We did a coding and billing review that was focused on those things that the government is pursuing, and those things that the government was pursuing, exactly where to look to see, are they doing it well or not. We were able to have lessons for the doctors before they became our employees, so it could help get them on the right track, so that going forward, that their documentation was going to support what they were doing. We also did a review for medical necessity because, as you know, cardiovascular services is one area where the government is spending a lot of their time and attention. So by doing that, we were able to proactively help the physicians and making sure we felt confident by this exercise we were going to reduce our number of denials, reduce our number of RAC issues just by having that exercise completed before we came on board. doing an exercise for a physician's practice, we don't want it to be that we're doing overkill. So the tools we developed can change depending on what you're doing. Is it a solo practitioner? Is it a small practice? Is it a big multi-specialty group? A physician's practice might not have a formal program in place, and that's 100% fine, but we still want to to have a conversation to see what kind of controls do they have in place. Are they doing any research? Do we have the right elements in place to make sure that with a mistake, they would be perceived as good corporate citizens? So we can move to the next slide, please, Susan. The specialty team has many different components. The general compliance, privacy, and IT security is very beneficial. We have done some extensive reviews when we're looking at another system or another organization, but it's also very beneficial to do a privacy and IT security review if you're going to be pursuing a physician's practice locally. As I mentioned, physician practices don't always have formal compliance programs in place, but they do have computers and they do have personnel using them and an awful lot of private health information. We have found this to be very value-added exercise to go into the physician's practice, see what tools they're using computer-wise, and make sure that they're going to be compatible with what the hospitals employ, making sure that they have the appropriate business associate agreements and documents in place so that right from the beginning they're functioning well and in a HIPAA-compliant fashion. A lot of physician practices struggle with HIPAA compliance, and so this has been very, very useful for us to do that. Another area that has proved to be a great value-added review is in research. There have been some facilities that initially said that they weren't doing research, but as we dug into them a little bit further, we learned that they were doing research, they just didn't realize it. It's difficult to do research and bill for research appropriately. There's a lot of different technical rules, so it's very blessed to have someone who has this skill set that can help us make sure that taking on a new organization, we have the appropriate controls in place to make sure that the research that they're doing is protecting human rights. We're in good shape as far as consenting and also with the technical billing rules. Laboratory is another area that the technical detailed rules, and so some physician enterprises have gotten into the practice of adding laboratory services in their offices. So this is beneficial both locally and we're doing a major growth opportunity corporately. And then for the enterprise, skilled nursing, home health, hospice, we do bring these individuals into every due diligence activity, but they support our efforts depending on the type of services that we're looking at procuring. Slide, please. And these risk-focused reviews want it to be that we're not just going through an exercise in a standard way. We do have a set of standards for what we're looking at, but we're not just looking willy-nilly. We want to do a risk review, and so we're looking at what things the government considers high risk. Filling and coding, I mentioned about the cardiac physicians. We have to do a baseline coding assessment before any physicians would even start. This is very beneficial in making sure that whatever things they might be doing, looking to see areas they need some tuning on. We do this kind of work when we're looking at hospital organizations, and it's proved to be very beneficial in helping us know how to prioritize our efforts. Appropriateness, as was mentioned prior, is all about medical necessity. This is an area that has been the source of a lot of headaches. So getting a sense of how an organization is dealing with different rights issues can also help us in making determinations around integration. Physician payment invoicing and the physician contracts are very key. As you know, this is an area where CHI a few years ago worked very diligently to get our ducks in a row. So we want to get a sense of the other organizations that we're considering affiliating with. How are they doing? Have they reached that level of control that they're compatible with us, or do they need additional work in that area? Some of the organizations that we did move forward and affiliate with, we realized that they were going to need to make some disclosures, and so it was very important. It was key in our integration efforts to make compliance with Stark and the anti-kickback statutes kind of like number one priority for them. We'd like to know what recent investigations and audits are occurring so that we can see how we can individualize our integration efforts, but also what steps need to be taken in order to mitigate risk. We had an example with this over information, and we identified the organization did know and did disclose to us that they had this issue with privacy and that they're working with the OCR. But as we looked over those documents, we realized that organization was not understanding the magnitude of the error that was made. And so we were able to give guidance to business leaders that this OCR issue was serious. We needed for there to be a plan in place to try to get them buttoned up, and we knew that there was going to be some significant resources needed from a privacy and security perspective in order to get them on the right road. That's another example of us providing a significant compliance value to the organization by helping to get that addressed quickly so that moving forward there would be long-standing issues to try to mitigate. You know, a lot of times with these disclosures and issues that pop up and are identified, it might just be technical errors. It could be something that's very simple. It's saying we'll identify compliance issues, that there's some kind of, that these are bad people or the good organization. The organization is going to have issues that are identified. We just want to do our best to find those areas where mistakes are happening and see what is the best order to standardize their compliance programs to be in keeping with CHI's in order that we as a whole together, all of CHI, is strong. You know, they say the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So we want to find those weak links, and we want to do our best to strengthen those areas so that when we find mistakes and we approach the government, we don't worry about them, that our program is not effective. And so on the next slide, the board on due diligence, it's important for board members to understand kind of the what, when, where, and why of a growth opportunity, what the impact will be to the organization as a whole. The public relations, the mission issues all need to be reviewed. And what actions are needed from the board? Well, we need everybody to understand that these conversations are confidential until they reach a certain point. It's important to be mindful of any potential conflicts. The conflicts are bad. It's just a matter that any potential conflicts need to be disclosed and discussed and documented how they'll be addressed. And then the information that the different business leaders provide is reasonable to rely on that information in making the decisions that are made as to whether or not a growth strategy makes sense to pursue. Are there any questions?
Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to ask a question, please press star 1. Question will be taken in the order received. Please star 1 to begin.
we're waiting for questions, we just wanted to say, too, that our process for compliance due diligence has evolved over the last few years. I think continue to get better at it. We continue to understand there are different questions that need to be asked depending on transaction, but, as things come up, especially Joyce mentioned, when we know that the government's looking at certain things, looking at maybe certain procedures that are being performed, we know that we need to add those questions to our due diligence process because, like I said earlier, we will be as prepared as possible, understand what new business line or this new market is going to bring to CHI. Were there any?
We have a question that just came in the queue from the line of Mouse Gart. Proceed.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. A quick question. I know this talk was geared to bringing new business into CHI and mitigating risk of that business. What are we doing in regard to existing business and reevaluating that business and mitigating the risk that's currently within our networks?
Well, already part of CHI, then from a compliance perspective, our team has some kind of responsibility, and we have a very active monitoring program in place, and we, like you mentioned, new business lines, as those come on board, we add monitoring activities around those business lines, especially if we know there are some high-risk areas, especially if the government is looking at some of those areas. So just as part of, our core business, what we do is we look to make sure that there are adequate internal controls in place to ensure that we are compliant in that area.
Would an outside audit periodically and look at BIM codes to make sure that there's no irregularities, et cetera, in the way billing's being done within the, and I'm thinking more of physician billing on the physician networks.
We have internal resources to do that, but we also engage outside resources when necessary. Another example is, as CHI moves into the managed care arena, we also have some internal expertise, but we also utilize external expertise when needed.
Great.
I just want to mention also that every year we do an effectiveness exercise, every single MBL, and we test the different controls and make sure that there's documentation of key elements. And it has an effectiveness review every year.
The questions. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to ask a question, please press star 1.
Do you have any other comments?
No, other than, I think just the point that as CHI continues to grow and right-size its markets and kind of move to this kind of concept, we're focused from a compliance standpoint on analyzing risk and determining when we use our resources best to help our boards, help our committee members understand the compliance risks that are out there. I think all of you are very much aware that the government is very focused on healthcare, and one of the reasons we put such a robust program in place is really hoping to understand what compliance risks are out there prior to bringing somebody on within our system. And just in more recent reviews that we've done as we brought on new systems, we found a significant number of issues, good things that we needed to find out, but things that also have helped to reiterate just how important it is to have solid physician contracting policies in place, to have processes for, periodically doing coding assessments and billing assessments. And, I think it's been a real testament to CHI that they've been willing to invest in this due diligence effort to make sure we understand exactly what we're taking on, because just one governmental investigation, as some of you may know, any of you who have been through one at your organization, it can be incredibly resource and it also can be very costly to an organization. I gave a presentation to the CHI Board of Stewardship Trustees just recently around an investigation we had in London, Kentucky at one of our facilities related to a particular physician, and we had a corporate integrity agreement, and that was actually something that we'd self-reported, self-identified, but a whistleblower joined that case later. We're paying over $100 million over a 5-year period just in being able to comply with the corporate integrity agreement, paying the settlement to the government, paying the legal fees associated with it. So at the end of the day, from a compliance standpoint, what we're most interested in is how do we identify these things, fix these problems, because they're inherent, just to get difficult health care, but how to identify them and give them and help organizations and boards be successful in preventing, these significant risks that are out there. So hoping that just by giving you this presentation and understanding the tools that we've got out there, you understand we're doing everything we possibly can to set out, what our big concerns are, mitigate that risk. And one thing I would encourage all of you to do is, if you are aware that they're bringing on new physician practices or taking any new business or divesting of business, we also have a pretty strong due diligence process, when we divest of business. It's good to ask those questions at your meeting, make sure you understand what's going on, what's been identified, what concerns there are for your particular organization, and partnering with some of these individuals. And I can tell you CHI has made decisions not to go forward with physicians or not to go forward with particular opportunities, primarily because of compliance issues. So I think that's a good thing. It's good to know that before it happens, and hope is that we're going to continue to keep this process strong. And I know there's a lot of activity going on, but with Susan Joyce's, we've been working with the due diligence team. I feel much more comfortable. We are really focusing our efforts where we need to.
Sometimes sometimes we don't have, the timeline to get due diligence done is pretty, so we do the best we can, but that's why it's important to get compliance engaged as soon as these opportunities are underway.
Our next question, Dave Zataka. Please proceed.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I understand the basic concepts and directions of CA with the due diligence process, and having been on the board for 5-6 years here locally, as a member, we discuss and we have to rely on your CH legal staff and full-time staff and other resources to stay on the task, quote unquote, with this. We can understand the large exposure and risk. However, in reviewing this, I'm not past the buck because of my daytime job, but there is a limit as a volunteer board member, and I realize you all are aware of this, but only can do so much as board members too. We expect the people that full time to do what they have to do to keep things on the task as well.
Right, you should, and really this is just to help you be better informed about what process is in place. But you're right, it's management's responsibility to dig in and understand the risks, and at the end of the day, to report the risks to you. You should be comfortable in that is what this process puts out in place. That's really why we're doing this, and that's exactly the message that we're trying to put. We understand it's not your responsibility to dig, but we do want you to be informed to understand what new activities are taking place, and to make sure that management is bringing forth concerns as they're identified. That's exactly what your role is.
And if there are things that you're not comfortable with, that you ask questions about it.
We're pretty open forum. We're well aware of that, and we try to keep things on the, as transparent as possible.
Yeah, that's great. Great to hear that. Okay, other?
For the line of Man DeLong.
Hi, this is Marianne Doling. Email to Andy Gibbons too, but can you discuss the difference, if there really should be any difference in the audits that are taken to the FAC committee, and it's fully discussed there, and then typically what we've been asked to do is just give an overall synopsis to the board. And I'm really getting the impression from this presentation that depending on the risks, regardless of whether you would have that full discussion at FAC, it should also be taken to the board. Can you clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, I can just speak from we handle it here at the national level, but really a lot of the risks would come through the board, through the report out of the FAC. So if internal auditors or something's coming out of a compliance review or a due diligence, and a risk is raised and the audit committee thinks it's something that the board needs to be aware of. The way that we handle that here is the chair of our audit and compliance committee or our finance committee, however that's being reported, when it comes their turn to present the discussions from the committee report, they have a discussion about any risks that they felt the board needed to know about. And Marianne, I can just speak from some of our experiences and going through some of our investigations with the government. There have been several times where we're working on a matter that is elevated to a level that we do think the board needs to be aware. And typically categorize those as being material to the financial statements, having a PR implication or a public relations impact to where it could run local news or the national news, having a mission focus or having a quality focus. So if we leave a patient at risk or quality of care is at risk, or we leave our mission in any way as being compromised, those are the types of risks that we would take forward to our board. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Other?
Yes. Our next question will come from the line of Michael Freese.
Yes, this is Mike DeFries. I'm on the Physician Transaction Review Committee for Nebraska and Southwest Iowa. For that MBO, and I was just curious as to, does every MBO have a PTRC committee that's functioning every month because of what the agenda looks like? We meet every month to go through things. I think we do a pretty effective job. One of the areas that I always have questions about is the latest and greatest things that are developing. We get timely communications on those things so that we can make sure that if something's coming up on our end of the deal, that we can apply the same kinds of criteria to the issues. But I was just curious as to how it's all kind of rolled together at CHI.
CHI, just because of our experiences with some of our London experience and our Towson experience in working through governmental investigations related to physician contracting, CHI put two policies in place: Legal Policy 9, which governs physician contracting, and then Legal Policy number 10, which governs physician transaction review committees. So all of our markets are required to have a physician transaction review committee. And those committees are active. They meet at varying times. Some meet monthly, some meet quarterly, some meet weekly. It really just depends on what's going on in that particular market. A very process for that's being followed. Most of the markets, if the markets have their corporate responsibility officer or their designee serve resource to that committee, and I know legal's also involved. But CHI has really put a tremendous amount of working behind that policy, or both those policies, legal policy 9 and 10. And the reason being is deal with physicians, and me going back and forth between physicians is such a high-risk area for us. So Michael Rowan, through the operations lead, made a decision and worked with President's Council to put these policies in place across CHI. So all the markets now have them. They're all functioning. As we bring on new markets, whether it's Houston or one of our new entities coming on board, they put a physician transaction review committee in place. One of our resources from legal comes and does specific education with that group to help them understand their responsibilities. And it does provide some independent oversight for us and help mitigate our risk across the organization. One I will say is I do know, given the growth in some of our markets, I do know it's been very burdensome for some of the individuals that are serving on those committees, but the hope is that over time it will become more of a stabilizing and won't be as resource demanding. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, it does take a lot of time. I mean, there's no doubt about the fact that once a month you got to do your homework before the meeting. Otherwise, you're not going to do your job. So it takes a lot of time and effort. And the only thing that I sometimes wonder about, and that was some part of my question, and that's are we time updates or bulletins? I know that Lee Bergoff, who handles ours, tries to keep us up to speed, but sort of developing national issues that you experience that would be good for us in terms of jotting down for purposes of just making sure we don't run across something similar. Are those coming out on a timely basis, and are some things we need to do to improve the area?
Yeah, things that we talked about, even just from the compliance team, is we actually put out a quarterly newsletter that goes out internally for our internal resources. For our edition, we're actually talking about doing an executive summary, something that can be shared with our PTRC committees and our audit and compliance oversight committees that will help them stay current on things impacting them from a compliance standpoint, not only the physician arena, but anything that's going on in the government. If there's a new area that the government is focused on, this would be a way that we communicate consistently across our fiduciary markets where some of those risks are, or, if we're changing, if we're making a significant change to either legal policy 9 or 10, we communicate that consistently across the organization. So we have heard feedback that it would be great to provide standardization around that, also reduce the burden on some of our local corporate responsibility officers for having to remember all the various things that need to be updated each quarter. So we're going to work on that, and you'll see that coming in the next quarter, and I'm hoping that'll help address that.
That's because, I think most of us that sit on the PRC, we worry about PTRC issues or physician action activity, but we also, have a low background or have some concerns about just general compliance issues as well. So that would be an excellent undertaking. So thank you.
A perfect example of that is the government is very interested, and there's quite a bit of data being released by the government around physician relationships with vendors and executive relationships with vendors and those type of things. So that would be something that somebody serving on a PTRC would be interested in, as well as an audit and compliance committee member. So that's why we're really hoping that this communication vehicle will be a way for us to share some of those new efforts out there. Right. Other questions?
More questions?
Okay. Anybody has any additional suggestions for additional areas you'd like education on? Please feel free to either email me, Michelle Cooper with 2 L's at catholichealth.net, or my assistant Candy Gibbons with 2 B's with ideas of additional areas you'd like education on. We will continue to do these webcasts quarterly. We record them so that if you'd like to go back and listen to them, or you have a new committee member coming on board that you would like to share all of the education webcasts that we've done in the past, we send that out each quarter. So in the next week or two, you'll receive a notification that will tell you how to dial in and listen to any one of the webcasts. So we are always open to new suggestions and additional areas that we can help provide you education on. And we thank you for your participation today. And if you have questions going forward, please feel free to reach out to me or your corporate responsibility officer. And thank you much.
That concludes today's presentation. You may now disconnect. Have a great day.